Hi everybody, it's crazy. It's Monday and it's time for the UPBGE video of the week. Now before I get started, gotta give a shout out to my trusted because you guys rock. To my crazy fam, I love you guys. And to my patrons, thank you for your continued support. Now we're up to episode number 53 and we left off last week with graphic mesh versus physics shape. Okay? I'm going to switch y'all over to here. Made me a little cube with an armature, okay, which is a couple of bones put together. Basically linked together so that way they become one mesh or one armature, okay. Now as you see, there's different bones that I've got, but in pose mode, I can actually make these bones move. Like, I can, see, let's rotate it on Z. So if I rotate it on Z, as you notice, the cube will move at that point because there is a weights put on it. If you parent it with automatic weights, and it will do most of that for you. We'll get into all this later on. Just wanted to get you all to understand that, this is just something I just hoping to do together, so that way I can, show you a little bit about it while I'm reading. Okay, so let's get started. All right, to animate a mesh with bones is a relatively expensive task for the computer. Therefore, when you set an object to play a pose action, you are changing only the graphic mesh of the object, the mesh used for the game render. All the physics computations, however, are done in another instance of this mesh and are not updated with the animation. Let's see here. Let me switch over to it. Okay, in this picture here, it's showing, a monkey with its armatures out here, but when it's running, okay, says you can see the screen when show physics visualization is on, and the game has an object armature animated. The original rest position of the armature is used for the physics collision mesh. This is the mesh with the arms lying still, although we can see the correct pose on top of that. This is not the one used for the physics computations. Okay, so this one is not the one for computation. This one is. Okay. Bone constraints. All right, so let's switch back over here so you can enjoy the little cube I've got right there. Bone constraints. The constraints are a handy set of tools to facilitate the animation process. Okay, they are more familiar to riggers than to animators, since they are used to build easier to animate armatures. Okay, have you ever seen if you ever downloaded a character and they have an armature already on it, it has these little extra things. I don't have one because I had a problem with one of my drives, so I lost a lot of it. But basically, it has like little buttons that you can hold that will make the elbows move, or the arms pull straight out, or the legs look like they're walking, so the knees will bend. Okay, if you ever seen that, then that's what that does. And they're called. It's because of the constraints such as the IK, inverse kinetics. We can create poses in very simplified ways. In a nutshell, bone constraints will spare you from animating all the bones individually by setting relations between them. Okay, so that's what that does. Constraints, okay. You see, it saves you from animating bones individually. It sets relationships. Like if I just wanted this one right here, this little guy right here, if I only wanted him to go up and down, I would set a constraint that would only make it do up and down, not forward and back. Okay, that's the idea for the constraints. The way bone constraints work in the game engine is quite similar to Blender itself. There are a few differences though. When you define a bone constraint, for example, the copy rotation, you set one bone to be constrained to another bone. The target bone In this case, the constrained bone will copy the rotation of the target bone for every pose, every frame. Okay, so basically, if I constrain this bone to follow this bone, then both of these will do the exact same. It's like kind of like a mirror modifier. It makes them do both. Okay, so if I, brought this one forward, so you grab it on the z-axis and I rotated it forward like this, then this one would rotate on the z-axis forward as well. Okay, so it would follow that exact pose. Okay. See, when you define I got a little bit behind there. Okay, the way bone constraints work, I just read that. When you define a bone constraint, for example, copy the rotation right. Okay. Unlike Blender, in the game engine, the target bone and the constrained bone need to be part of the same armature. In other words, you can't have another bone over here and have it copy this bone over here. It wouldn't work. Okay, Blender, you can do that, but in the game engine, you cannot. In the newer version of UPBGE, I believe you can. I don't know. I have to ask the guys over there on the UPBGE server, but if you know, drop it in the description, or let other people know as well. Okay. In Blender, bone constraints can be used in two ways. The first and simplest way is to use them to help with posing. For example, the track to bone constraint helps you indirectly animate the eyes. Rotations by animating the target the eyes are looking at. Okay, so basically it's a point in front of the character and the eyes follow it wherever you move that point. See, in this case, even though you are not directly animating the eye bones, the animation process is much more intuitive. This is how you do it in Blender. And this is how you will do it for the game engine. Okay, so even in the game engine, if you want your character's eyes to move or something to go in parallel, that's exactly how you would do it. Okay. Let's see. Another way of using them is by setting up the constraints and animating their influence values. Each bone constraint has an influence that ranges from 0 to 1. Bone constraint influence. When you start a game, the current influence of the bone constraints will determine the initial armature behavior. If you need to change it during the game, you can use an armature actuator with the set influence option. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up, and we'll switch this over to the logic editor. Okay, what it's talking about is, let's see, which one was it? Armature actuator. Okay, so we need to go over here. Okay, so if you come over here and you come to this armature actuator, this is what the armature is, what they're talking about. Okay, you set the influence here. You can set the influence right there, and then you come down here, and here's your 0 to 1. Okay, you can have it all the way down to 0, or you can have it all the way up to 1. It's either one of the two. Okay. Bone constraints not supported. Because the constrained bone and the target bone need to be in the same armature, some constraints that rely on external curves, hinges, and objects are incompatible with the game engine. In the current version of Blender, the unsupported bone constraints are spline IK, follow path, rigid body joint, script, shrink wrap, and partially the child of. Okay, rigid body joint partly supported. Rigid body joint is supported as an object constraint, but not as a bone constraint. You will learn how to use it in chapter 6 physics. Okay, so that'll be in chapter 6. So keep that in the back of your mind. Okay. Bone constraints supported. All the transform, tracking, and relationship bone constraints that are not mentioned previously can be used as you would in Blender. Let's see. Okay. Let's switch over to here. Nope, there. Okay. In figure 4-6, you can see the menu with all the bone constraints compatible with the game engine highlighted. Okay, so that's all these. You can do all these right here, but you can't do this one, can't do this one, this one, this one, this one, or this one. But you can do all these others. That's what they're saying. Okay? All right. If you're not familiar with bone constraints, following is a brief overview of them and their functionalities. As with most every other feature of the game engine, the suggested usages illustrate but do not limit their potential application. Okay, so we're going to go over them. We're going to do the transforms and see. Let's go to constraint over here. Let's break. I hate that does that. That's just so annoying. Okay. Nope. I need to bring that up. There we go. Okay, because we don't need the scene layers right now. Okay, so constraints are right here. These are your constraints. Okay. So, well, okay, that is. I'm sorry. I did the links, but we need a constraints tab. So you can add a bone constraint here. Here goes all the ones that they show. Okay, these are actually the ones that will work. Okay, let's see, lock track. Yeah, spline IK can't be used. Okay, and then after child of, so floor can't be used. Follow path can't be used. Rigid body joint can't be used, and shrink wrap cannot be used. Yeah. So, but just about everything else here you can do. So we're going to go over each one of these in this next one. Okay, so we're going to go into transform first. Okay. The transform bone constraints help you build a bone control system. This control armature is a high-level armature with only a few bones directly affecting the real armature. Okay, so basically it's copy, limit, limit rotation, limit location, limit distance, maintain volume, transformation, and transform cache. Okay, now it's going to go into detail of these. Okay, copy, location, rotation, and scale. These allow you to copy part of the transformation and to set an offset for the copy. The bone doesn't get locked, allowing for further adjustment of the bone transformations. Okay. Let's see. Which would be switch to. I believe it's that one. Yeah. Okay. That would be this one right here. Like if you did copy, location, rotation, and scale. Okay. These are just going to copy them. They're not locking it to it. Okay. But these are just some of the ones. Okay. Let's switch back. Yep. Okay. So a simple use would be building control armatures with bones duplicated between the armatures. Those bone constraints allow for syncing of the bone chains. An artistic example of its use would be clothes or armor. The external bone chains for clothes can copy the base bone chain for the body to use as a base transformation. Since there is no locking, you can animate the external bones independently of the body animation. The offset can be used to match the real separation between the body and the clothes geometries. Okay, so that was copy transformations, okay, or copy transforms. Unlike previous bone constraints, you cannot set the bone offset to in this constraint. So with influence 0 to 1, we're going to do the copy transforms right there. Okay, that's this one right here, right? See, you cannot set the bone offset in this constraint. So with influence at 1, the constrained bone and the target bone will be exactly in the same place. Okay, so you might want to bring it down just a little bit if it's like clothes or something, is what they're talking about. Okay, as a rule of thumb, an influence different than 1 produces more interesting behaviors. Okay, now let's go to the add constraint because they got that one up there. They've got an add constraint. Oh, copy transform. That was the same one we were on. Okay, so if we pick a bone, for example, my armature, okay, and we pick a single bone, we'll just do bone 5. Okay, as you see, it automatically moved. But as you put the influence down, it's how much it's influenced, okay? So, as a rule of thumb, an influence with difference than 1 produces more interesting behaviors. Limit distance, limit rotation, and limit scale. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. Okay, so that's these guys right here. Limit distance, location, rotation, and scale. Okay. It didn't have location. I guess it's a separate one. Okay, so when you use a bone transformation to influence another bone, for example, bone control, sliders, or bone drivers, you are mapping a range of transformation. The position from 0, 0, 0 to 0, 1, 0 into the constrained bone. See the transformation bone constraint. Okay? Limit bone constraints restrict the bones to transformations inside the expected range they are being mapped from. Okay? So, I just had it up so we can do it. Which one is it? Distance. Okay, this is a limit distance. So if you pick the armature, okay, and then your target, let's just say this bone here, okay, you have your distances here. Okay, let's go like this. It doesn't do anything. At least this one doesn't do anything. But they had a number set in there. You got inside and then your influence of that bone. Okay. Unfortunately, it's not going to show it because I don't know why. Let's do 5 again. Let's see if that can do it. I'm just curious. Okay, so let's put influence at half and try that. It doesn't do anything. Well, we really don't have a complicated little guy here, but for more complicated stuff, then it's different. They can also be used to complement copy location, rotation, and scale bone constraints by copying the transformation, but limiting some of the parameters. For example, copy location, but not allow Z to be below 0 under the bone used as a ground reference. Okay, so I guess this would be the when you limit the distance, you don't want you want to limit the distance to whatever distance it can go. So when we go to animate that number 5 bone, then I think it's see that one. When we go to limit this bone right here, it will limit it to a certain point. Okay. So but I have that on bone 1. So let's close out of that. Here we go. Okay, so let's say I want to use bone 5. I don't want it to go left and right. Okay. So I would limit its distance, okay, by 45. Or 5, we'll say 5. There you go, 5, 5. Okay, and its influence is only 50%. Okay, so now when I set something up, or set this up, for example, okay, this limit distance will limit the distance of 5 either which way going around in a circle. Okay, I believe. Alright, so the next one. Maintain volume. Okay. Let's see. There it is. Maintain volume. Okay. This bone constraint does not use a target. Okay. The transformation happens only dependent on the bone itself and within the axis opposite to the selected free axis. Okay. So this is your free axis. You have X, Y, and Z. Say, you know, this one, see. When dependent on the bone itself and within the axis opposite. Okay, so say for example I didn't want this to go on the X axis. Okay, I would put it on that one. Okay. It's used for squash and stretch, the classic cartoon effect for squeezing bouncing balls. Okay, so it will actually make this one not, you know, go but so far on the x-axis, if I'm reading that correctly. Let's see, where are we at? Whew, we're at 21 minutes. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and leave it off of transform for this week. Let me go ahead and show you that one. It's transformation right here. Okay, that's the one we're going to leave off for this week. So let's go ahead and switch it back to here. That is page 17. So that way we made it down to the bottom of page 17. And we'll continue on with it next week with transformations. We're going to really get into the constraints and a lot of other stuff. This is just, like I said before, this is just kind of like a overview to kind of help you out with understanding them. It's not a full application. We're not going to be building anything right yet. Okay, so till next week.